At the Palette Art Gallery, Rajesh Ram's Carving Time is not just about time, but it is about man and time. We are looking at a set of stoneware sculptures that have been created in epic proportions. Proportions in terms of composition, proportions in terms of the natural glaze, and proportions in terms of the historical odyssey that he presents. In terms of the spirit, in terms of the evolution of man, and in terms of the understanding of history that goes back to antiquity. If we look at these works, we are looking at a set of works that will actually bring us face to face, not just with animals, not just with man, but about the beauty of hybrids. And Rajesh says that when I create works, I am looking at not just the history, but I am looking at all the things that speak about life and its existence. Life and its existence, then, for Rajesh Ram, is not just about the evolution of existence, it is also about going back in time. And when we look at it, he says that I'm constantly exploring the properties of the place of history amidst a fluidity and movement created with heavy connotations of human reality and the power of politics in the life of man. When we speak of the power of politics, we are looking at works that not just give us composition, but we are looking at works that have been created in the imagination of an artist who is both cerebral as well as aesthetic. If we look at this piece, we are looking at a piece of a little human who sits on a globular figure. He calls it the single-horned boy, and we go back to Greek tales. We go back to the tales of antiquity that speak to us about man and nature. We go back to the tales of antiquity that tell us that man and nature have always lived with each other in harmony, and it has been an existence that has been written about. The oldest philosophy in India is Purush Prakriti. And in that old philosophy, it says that man and nature are interconnected. When we look at this piece, at first it has Western connotations, but then it boils down to the fact that tales as old as history, tales that spoke about man and animal and life and the environment, were always tales that belonged to the Southeast Asian nations too. And we are looking at a show that talks to us not just about the beauty of the human form. We are looking at a show in which an artist says the environment is as important as the human. If we look at this work, we are looking at a work that gives us the image of a hippopotamus. When we think of the hippopotamus, we think of a large figure. It is monumental, it is gigantic. But when we look at this sculpture, we are looking at a sculpture that talks to us about the beauty of botanical creation as well as the evolution of the animal kingdom. In many ways, Rajesh Ram brings back the beautiful essays of Charles Darwin. And Darwin wrote that the most important thing about the evolution of life is the existence of animals as well as birds and beasts as well as man. And if we look at it clearly, we are thinking of the importance of composition, and we also realize that Rajesh Ram is an important artist in the architect of India's art history. He says, when I sculpted the roaring hippo a few years ago, I was narrating the story of power and the traveling notes of history. Half head represents the politics behind the throne. This composition is the creation of a scene of how my mind plays back the narration of the beauty, of the reality of history and its multiple elements, says Ram. When we look at the second work, it's called Melting Backbone. We think of the camel. The beauty of the camel is its neck. It eludes grace. When it walks through the desert, it actually has the grace of a gazelle. The only thing is that we are looking at a figure that is monumental. And when we look at this, when we look at what he has done with the spine, it is fascinating to see the compositional character and charisma of the works of Rajesh Ram. Here we find the hybrid animals, the manner in which he fuses the rhino and the horse. It brings back stories to us, stories of the past. And the most beautiful thing about stories is that when we think of legends of the past, the best stories have been legends that spoke to us about the hybrid nature. When we speak of the hybrid nature, we are thinking of, if I were to get extremely angry, I would roar like a lion. If I wanted to have the beauty and grace of an animal that runs and gallops through the forest, I would think of a horse. And you think of the many horse stories. When we think of the rhino, we know that the rhino is one of the most endangered species in the world. In art history, we remember the great Albrecht Dürer. Dürer listened to the tales of the sailors who had seen the rhino. And listening to their stories, he made the drawing of the rhino. It is one of the most beautiful examples of art history of when you can create an animal just by the description of what someone has given you. And this exhibition actually brings back in delight all those descriptions. We move to one of my favorite works in the show. And this is a work that speaks to us about, he calls it Wall of History. We are looking at a work in which he plays with juxtapositions. He juxtaposes the erotic image of man, the most perennial and the most enduring image for artists all over the world, ever since the earth began, has been the human figure. And he creates the human figure as if he is reclining, but he reclines against the beauty of sculptures, as well as the beauty of the lion, one of the most beautiful symbols of power and courage and loyalty. When we look at the juxtapositions that he creates, he gives us actually a moss-like structure. This could even belong to marine animals, to the sea. But the manner in which he puts the history of temples, he puts man in reality, and he also puts the lion to speak about the coexistence of man with nature. But we are looking at experience, we are looking at history, and we are looking at the naturality of elements in the world. And that is the most beautiful thing about this exhibition, that when we move from one work to another, we are looking at all kinds of compositions that have been created. Rajesh Ram has a very deep understanding of anatomical perfection. When we look at the work, we realize that he understands the human figure and the many parts of the human body. The many parts of the human body he modifies, and he creates works in which he is always playing with juxtapositions. But these juxtapositions don't look ugly. They don't look as if they are peculiar. They look curious and they look quaint. And that is the success of the compositions in this exhibition. When we look at the horse and we look at man's head, we are not looking at man who galloped, but we are looking at man who thinks. We are looking at man who loves. We are looking at the greatest horse stories in the world. When the Oscars declared The Elephant Whisperers as the first prize winner in documentaries, my mind went back to The Horse Whisperer, a beautiful film made in Hollywood. And in many ways, this work brings back that memory. One of the greatest things about this exhibition is that it teaches us to love animals. Rajesh Ram could not have made these images if he is not an animal lover himself. When you look at his horses, they have been created in the beauty of perfection. A horse is such a beautiful animal. And I looked at the horses and I remember this very beautiful poem written by Walter de la Mare, and it is called Nicholas Nye. And Walter de la Mare says, "Thistle and darnel and dock grew there, and a bush in the corner of May. By the orchard wall I used to sprawl in the blazing heat of the day, half asleep and half awake, while the birds went twittering by, and nobody there my load to share but Nicholas Nye." Loneliness. Walter de la Mare was talking to us about loneliness and saying that here was a little boy who was sleeping on the orchard wall, and it is the horse that kept him company. When I look at Rajesh Ram's works, I'm thinking of the horse that has kept man company for so many years. So many years. So, when we look at these works, we are looking at works that actually talk to us about multiple references. There are possibilities. There are possibilities of not just time and tide. There are possibilities of so many stories. We think of the Panchatantra. We think of the great stories of Bengal, of Maharashtra, of Tamil Nadu, of Kerala, of the Northeast. We think of the great elephant corridor of the Northeast that speaks to us about the beauty and the importance of elephants and how there needs to be land, there needs to be parks, there need to be resources for nature. And in many ways, this show, it actually highlights all these importances and tells us wildlife must be nurtured, wildlife must be looked after. In this image, he plays with multiple facets. One of the greatest things that has happened in India is when you look at temples that are now being built that go back to history. And one of the most recent temples that has been built is the Panchmukhi Ganesha, a Ganesha with 5 faces. And the temple has been built to create a sense of bringing out the inspiration of the Ganesha. If we thought we knew what the Ganesha was, the Panchmukhi tells us there are many facets in a god. It also tells us, this sculpture by Rajesh Ram tells me, as humans, there are many facets in us. But which is the most important facet that we would like the world to see? The beauty of this exhibition is the questions that it carries. We will go last of all to his Homo sapiens series in the next hall. One of the most fascinating series in the show is a set of works that he calls Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens has the head of the apes and it has sculptures. Rajesh says, "I have always had a fascination for the roots of human history. It creates an unending curiosity within me. In this sculpture, I am creating a bridge between the past and the present. I have portrayed an erotic figurine style from Indian temple sculptures. I wanted to represent fertility and procreation of civilizations by making these sculptures. Here, I have created 10 Homo sapien sculptures in different styles and figurations." When we look at the Homo sapien sculptures, we realize that what is beautiful is the feeling of ascension, the feeling of Darwinian delight when you think of the evolution of man, and the beauty of creativity when human hands can mold and create works that will stand as a testimony to time. I have always loved coming here as a reviewer ever since Palette began. But more importantly, I always felt they give each one of us a lesson in the display of works as well as the importance of lighting for art. 33 years ago, when I began my career as a writer, I saw an exhibition in which the chief lighting designer of Massachusetts Institute of Technology had done the lighting for a John Singer Sargent painting, and I realized, and he told me, there is something called warm light and cold light. And these sculptures, it is the lighting that has been done here, of which Rohit Gandhi is a genius at, that makes you understand and value that lighting for art is important, but it is also important to create an experience for art lovers. And that is carving time. Thank you for your presence.